It might just be that the new Donald Trump is Kari Lake. Kari Lake, the gubernatorial candidate for Arizona, the Republican candidate for governor in Arizona, is a star. As laid out wonderfully by Darren Beatty at revolver.news, a star is born in Kari Lake. Last week here on the Cain Podcast, we talked about the value of authenticity. I asked you, is AOC real? Is Kari Lake for real? We talked about whether or not authenticity was sufficient, that it's necessary outside of elite performers to show people who you are down deep, who you really are. That is where lies charisma. I think AOC is real, and I think that is a problem. I also think the real deal is Kari Lake. At Revolver, they have a wonderful breakdown of what it is that is working for Kari Lake. Yes, definitely. She has the policy proposals that represent the quote-unquote new right. She has embodied the ideology of Trumpism. But so has Ron DeSantis, and so have many others attempting to inherit the mantle of Trump. And while Ron DeSantis' political instincts are always on point, he always makes the right policy decision, and he does pair it with handling the media in a very, very charismatic fashion. There's something different about Kari Lake. There's something smooth. There's something authentic. There's something strong. There's something real. Kari Lake is a star. And of course, because of that, Kari Lake has been absolutely vilified by the mainstream media, though the slurs are ununique. It's the same that you've always heard. A semi-fascist, that she is an authoritarian, that she represents the end of democracy. What does Kari Lake truly represent? She represents a person that can pull the curtain back, who actually can call the BS. She is a person who goes beyond policy and gives us the pathos that you need in a leader, in someone that can make an argument, in someone that understands the three pillars of persuasion: ethos, pathos, and logos. We all need to feel. It's true. No matter how intellectual we want to be, no matter how much evidence we want laid before us, no matter how much logic is our foundation, we all feel. We want to feel, and we need to feel. There is no doubt that Donald Trump made you feel. He cathartically gave you the voice that so many wanted when it came to the lies of the media. He cathartically represented the strength that we hoped for from leaders, instead of bending to the popular will of the mainstream media or the current temporary fad of the zeitgeist. Oh, we're all into cutting the genitalia off of our 8-year-olds. Should we just go along? No. Always on offense, Donald Trump was the leader that so many have looked for and will look for probably again in a short matter of time, but who has also inspired questions like, is this unique? Is this exclusive to Donald Trump? Is there someone else that can inherit the mantle? And for the past couple of years, the answer to that has been, I don't think incorrectly, Ron DeSantis. But there's something new now in Arizona. There's something new with Kari Lake, who is a star. Over at Revolver, they lay down exactly what it is that she does, specifically in her interactions with the media, that reveals that same type of Trumpian pathos, that same type of Trumpian leadership, that same type of Trumpian charisma. Let's walk through a few interactions of Kari Lake with the media to illustrate what it is that she is doing so perfectly that makes her a star. Once again, credit to Darren Beatty at Revolver for pointing this out. But let's take a look at one interaction. Kari Lake is standing at a podium on the campaign trail, surrounded by a gaggle of media. She, not unlike Donald Trump, and very unlike Joe Biden or others, as we've talked about in the last episode of the Cain Podcast, like Dr. Mehmet Oz, Republican running for Senate in Pennsylvania, is totally unafraid to take on a challenger. Kari Lake has a gaggle of challengers around the podium, and she takes a question from someone who asks her about her position on crime and asks her specifically about the opinions of, quote unquote, a lot of people of color.
Can you repeat the first part of that? I missed that.
Yeah, a lot of people of color feel like they're
A lot of people
targeted.
of color. A lot of people of color. How many people of color have you talked to about that?
I mean, if you look at surveys,
Which surveys? I'm happy to look at those stats because I will tell you this: that I talk to people of color. I talk to all Arizonans. They're all concerned about the crime. Just because your skin isn't the same color as yours doesn't mean you want your kids to be walking down the street in an unsafe neighborhood.
You can hear the reporter say, a lot of people of color say, then in his opinion, his question is cut off. Kari Lake jumps in immediately. Excuse me, what did you say? Can you repeat the first part of that question? And he repeats, a lot of people of color. She says, what people of color? What is a lot? Where are you getting that characterization? What do you mean by a lot of people of color? And immediately now, the reporter is on ice skates. He can't get his feet underneath him because his BS has been called. How's his BS been called? By rejecting the assumption, by rejecting the predicate. You see, your average candidate would wait and listen to the question to its very end, but the question to its very end would mask the purpose of the actual question. This is not a journalist interested in any type of authentically curious manner in the answer to his question. This is not a journalist seeking the truth. This is testimony in the guise of a question, and Lake recognizes it immediately. It's unimportant ultimately where he will go. It's unimportant what he ultimately will ask. What's important is, can he box her into a position where he has forced her to accept the presumption, what? That a lot of people of color think that her policies are racist. She immediately rejects the presumption, the predicate, the assumption in his question. What people of color? What surveys are you referring to? I'd like to see those surveys. May I see the context of your question? She does it, by the way, very cordially. She does it firm, but also nice. The reporter doesn't know what to do. Well, you talk to, now he's resorting to anecdotal evidence. Now he's using his own personal interactions as his proof, as his support of, quote unquote, a lot of people of color, thus giving Kari Lake the license to use her own anecdotal evidence, her own conversations with people of color. I talk to people of color, and then she rejects the entire premise on the most moral of grounds. I'm not interested in skin color. I'm not interested in dividing people. I think people all have the same interests. I think down deep we're all Americans. I think down deep we're all humans, and everyone wants to feel safe. She exposes this reporter in a matter of seconds as not truly a reporter, as not truly a curious person, as someone not truly asking a question, but someone baking in a gotcha. But I don't want to trivialize that in the form of, the Sarah Palin gotcha question, how do I stump you? That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is, I'd like to ask you a question. When did you stop beating your wife? You see, I'm not going to answer that question because there's a presumption of truth in your question, and your question is a falsehood. A lot of people of color. No. What do you mean? Where is your evidence? Where is your survey? Please back up your testimony, not your question. Kari Lake spent 20 years in media, so she knows the game. She has spent time in media understanding exactly how biased her colleagues are, not just in Arizona, but in the United States of America. And that's revealed in another question that she's asked when she's asked about abortion. This time, a reporter says, hey, when is it? What is your opinion on abortion? What is your policy, and why is it so extreme? Why does it not even include exceptions for rape and incest?
Tell me, abortion is effectively banned in the state right now. Tell me, is that something that you support?
I support saving as many lives as possible. And what I really want to know, and I've been waiting, I tune into you guys all the time. I want to know where Katie Hobbs stands, but I never hear you guys ask her that. I'm pro-life.
Here, Kari Lake parries the question away by doing two things. A, answering it directly, and B, demanding fairness. She's not afraid of her answer. She's not afraid of falling on the politically incorrect side of this issue. She knows that historically, if you made the argument that life begins at conception, or that any life, regardless of how it is conceived, is a life worthy of Savior, is somehow outside the bounds of mainstream media. She doesn't care. She answers it calmly and confidently with conviction. But she does something else. B, she requires fairness. She understands that these types of questions, this demand for specificity, is only asked of candidates in the Republican Party. It's not asked of candidates in the Democrat Party. Think about it. Have you ever heard a Democrat politician asked directly, pressed for a specific answer as to when life begins, or when it is acceptable to draw a line on restricting abortion? With the decline of Roe v. Wade and the prospect of this issue returning to the democratic process, Democrat politicians are going to have to answer that question. Over the past 40 years, 50 years, you've been able to deflect to the Supreme Court. You've been able to get lost in the nonsense, the inventions of the Supreme Court about viability, about trimesters. But no one has truly been put to the test on the morality, on the science, on the conviction of their opinion. If you do not believe that life begins at conception, when do you believe that life begins? And if you believe in abortion after the point at which you believe life begins, why do you find that killing, that murder, acceptable? Lay out your opinion. That's not a baked-in question. Even me using the term murder isn't a baked-in assumption or biases, because the intentional killing of another human being would be a murder. Now, if you as a lawmaker want to create an exception to the definition of murder, to say, well, a life that is not yet post 6 months past conception is a life that is subservient to the life that carries that infant in utero, and therefore the life that carries that infant in utero has the exclusive ability to end that life, make your argument. You're not anymore making the nonsense argument about the difference between a fetus and a human being. You're not anymore making the argument or deferring to the concept, the ill-defined concept of viability. You're now answering the question directly, which shouldn't be so terrifying. It's what has been required of Republican politicians for a half century. And it is well, good, and righteous, and oh so very smart, of Kari Lake to demand that same bit of fairness from journalists of her political opponent. What would Katie Hobbs, the candidate on the Democrat side for governor of Arizona, what would Katie Hobbs answer to that question? Would she say, once a child has emerged from the birth canal, so it's okay to perform an abortion at 8.5 months pregnant? Would she say, no, I'll go back on the concept of viability. What does viability mean? Well, it could be supported. Life wouldn't end outside the womb. Well, science dictates that, and with the marvels of modern medicine, that line keeps backing up. Well, then, I don't know, when it's not dependent upon the mother. Well, a 3-month-old child out of the uterus, out of the womb, immersion to the world, breathing free air, is dependent upon the mother. Is that child's right to life, subservient to the mother's right to be free of that life? Well, maybe once you breathe free air. Okay, what about a partial birth abortion? What if the nose hasn't yet reached out of the vaginal canal? What if the baby hasn't been spanked? What if it hasn't taken its own breath? These are not little questions. These are actually really big questions about, life and when it's okay to, end a life. But none of those questions are ever pressed to a Democratic politician because it's only ever left with this, it's a woman's right to choose. And all Kari Lake is asking, again, calmly, aggressively, strongly, confidently, is be fair. Ask the same questions of my opponent that you would ask of me. Here's yet another example. Here's Kari Lake interacting now with, again, a gaggle of reporters outside of an event she just conducted. She emerges from the event to a gathering of, I don't know, some 24 reporters ready to fire off questions. Once again, it's reminiscent of Donald Trump during the height of the pandemic, going before an antagonistic press, dozens of reporters, and standing there for an hour or two, taking question after question. You remember that. It was in April, May, and June of 2020, taking all questions. Kari Lake walks out ready to take all questions. In that, you hear a reporter, again, use the sort of a lot of people of color tactic of saying, you were buzzing on the internet for being called an election denier.
And one of them has, most of them were asking, is she an election denier, Kari Lake? And that was like going around on all different cable news. What do you elaborate on this?
I'm actually shocked you asked that question, George.
Well,
actually, Anthony, where's Anthony?
Once in a while.
Here, Anthony. I did a little, actually, Anthony, how old are you?
20.
Are you a journalist?
No.
Well, you did better research than half these people. Let's talk about election deniers. Here's 150 examples of Democrats denying election results. Oh, wow, look at this. This is from Joe Biden's press secretary. Reminder, Brian Kemp stole the gubernatorial election from Georgians and Stacey Abrams. Democrats saying that. Is that an election denier? Oh, look at this. Just heard Republican Ryan Costello said it would be difficult for Stacey Abrams to win because she lost her state bid, but yet she's still claiming she never lost. This is outrageous. Hillary Clinton. Trump is an illegitimate president. Is she an election denier?
Okay, so the assumption is baked into the question once again. You're an election denier. What do you say to that? Here, Lake does something absolutely charismatic. And quite honestly, whether or not it's instinctual or practiced, it is high level. She does two things. A, she makes it personal, and B, she makes it unscripted. She says immediately, I believe the reporter's name was George. I'm surprised you would answer that question, George. It's endearing. She smiles. She laughs. He smiles. He laughs. He's about to be cut down to size. She does this often, by the way. You can see many in interviews where she acknowledges the personal relationship with the reporter, that she knows these people, and therefore she knows not just their tricks of the trade because she was in the business for so long, but she knows them as individuals. That's what happens behind the mic. Because the camera doesn't capture who is on the other side of the microphone, you tend to think that whoever's on the other side of the microphone is this quote-unquote inhabitant of credibility and establishment. And this person on the other side of the microphone is this embodiment of objectivity. It's not. Look, not to overly generalize, but it's often, I'd say, a 24-year-old girl, 2 years out of college, very sure of her own worldview and high on the power of her newfound job, who really doesn't accept a rebuttal, a cross-examination with any form of grace, much less competency. The reason I know this is Kari Lake is filming these interviews on her own. She is also filming it. You'd only ever see the cut of what happens in front of the microphone. You would never see the young lady over there, devoid of Kari Lake's charisma, devoid of Kari Lake's life experience, devoid of Kari Lake's wisdom, but not devoid of Kari Lake's confidence. Oh, so confident in their ignorance. But Lake turns the camera. She shows who it is. She makes it personal. She acknowledges there's a human being behind the question. And oftentimes, not only would we not get the human being, we wouldn't even get the question. We would just get Kari Lake responding to, again, the presumption baked into the question. Well, I'm not a racist, no matter what a lot of people of color say about my policies. That's what Mitt Romney would do. That's what most Republican politicians would do. Wait to the end of the question and somehow try to figure out later, why was I always on defense when I knew the answer to that question? Because you accepted the premise baked into that question. Here, George bakes into the premise that Kari Lake is an election denier, and she immediately calls for Anthony, again, making it personal. This is one of her assistants, Anthony, a 20-year-old, and says, Anthony, bring that here. It's funny that you would bring up election denier. How old are you, Anthony? I'm 20. Are you a journalist, Anthony? No, I'm not. And yet you did better research than all of these journalists. And then she takes him on be authentically. She doesn't go through it with like a senatorial pre-prepared set of slides. She doesn't have people, shifting through big PowerPoint presentations. She doesn't have a sermon at the ready, a monologue ready to go. She just talks. And she goes through these papers, all of which are printouts of news articles showing Democrats denying elections. Oh, look, here's Hillary Clinton denying an election. Flip, flip, flip. Oh, look, here's Stacey Abrams denying an election. She is on offense, unscripted, calling out the BS, rejecting the premise, putting the person, asking the question of bad faith on their heels. It's really strong stuff that requires the conviction of your beliefs, the confidence of your intellect, the knowledge of the game, and quite honestly, the at-bats in the media of dealing. I'm not saying you have to have been someone in the media, as Kari Lake was a television reporter for several decades in Arizona, but someone who has had the at-bats of taking on adversarial opinions and thinking on the fly. It truly, truly is high-level stuff. It truly, truly then elicits from you and me, deep in us, feelings, pathos, charisma, magnetism. By the way, in that process, it just rejects all the BS identity politics so important to Democrats. Do you think any Republican today is actually asking themselves whether or not they like Kari Lake more or less because she's a woman? No, they just know that is a strong leader. Would they think any more or less of Kari Lake were she a woman of color? No, they just know that is a person of conviction. It doesn't matter what you have between your legs, and it doesn't matter what gender you identify, and it doesn't matter what skin color you present. What people are drawn to is charisma, is confidence, is conviction, is leadership. Finally, let me leave you with this. Perhaps the clip that made Kari Lake the first of her internet virality, the first of her internet renown, was an interaction with CNN's Kyung Law. As she's walking into a campaign event, Law is again with a group of reporters sort of greeting her as she comes through the door. It's an unscripted moment, and Law sticks her hands out and says, "Hi, Kari, Kyung Law from CNN." And then Lake says, "Oh, hi, you look different without your mask on." Immediately, in a pretty good-natured way, if not good-natured, in a pretty soft way, poking Kyung Law and making a bit of fun at her fidelity to masks. Now Law's on her heels and says, "I would love to talk to you. I would love to ask you some questions." Lake knows very well what that type of interview would be. And she says, "Yeah, I'll give you an interview as long as it airs on CNN+. CNN Plus had just recently been canceled when Kyung Law made that request. Kari Lake says, "I'll do that interview as long as it's on CNN+. Is that still around?" And Law says, no. Oh, that's because the American people don't like what you're selling. And what you're selling is propaganda. All unscripted, all in the moment.
Hi.
Kari.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Count off and CNN.
You don't have a mask on anymore. What's going
we're
on?
outside. Do you have a minute
Wow.
to
Well,
chat?
we're 6 feet apart.
Do you have a minute to chat?
I'll do an interview.
Okay.
As long as it airs on CNN Plus. Does that still exist? I didn't think so, because the people don't like what you guys are peddling, which is propaganda. Thank you.
That's involuntary servitude.
Look, Kari Lake has the right policies. She's set to declare an invasion to deal with illegal immigration in the state of Arizona, she says, within the first couple of hours of being inducted, where she elected the governor of Arizona. She has new right Trumpian politics, if that's what you like. But what she has, perhaps more importantly, is she has personality. She has intellect, confidence, conviction. She has charisma. Kari Lake is a star. Kari Lake might just be the true inheritor. She might just be the next Donald Trump. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.